What's up guys, this is jimmyduraide from BTS Lab. Today I'll be making a live play review from one of our members. We said that we had our 1 year anniversary. I think it was beginning of May, and we decided to ask you guys to provide us with some live play footage, and we're gonna try to review all of them. So the first one I chose was this one. It's Edwin De Jong, our member that is playing 10 NL Zoom. So he's going to be two-tabling. We're going to be taking a look at how he approaches the game, take a look maybe exploitatively how we can approach these type of games as well. As far as the labels, I'm not sure what they mean. And also, I'm not sure what HUD is using, but it looks pretty straightforward in the sense that all the information is written just beside the stats. So we're going to take a look into his footage, see how he plays, and let's get into it. Ace-10 off, he was facing an open and a 3-bet. Pocket deuces, we're going to be opening on the button if nobody opens. Against a 3-bet, it's a hand that we can sometimes call, sometimes fold. Also take a look into the sizing. This type of texture, I kind of like the fact that he actually has a checking range, so I don't think it's one of those textures that we can just see bet range and work very well. The thing is, he has a lot of stuff that connects with that board, so he has a lot of gut shots, a lot of overcards, flush draws. Being the board rainbow or there's a flush draw present makes a very big difference in single raise spot, in 3-bet pot. So there are some spots where we can just see bet range when the board is rainbow, and then when there's a flush draw we have to do more polarization. But the first thing is I like the fact that he has a checking range on this board. When you're trying to decide like whether I should see bet range or not, take a look at how many quality draws he can have. So when the jack and the 8 is there, he's gonna have hands like 9-10 off, which is open-ender, or queen-9 off that he has a gut shot with 1-overs, a gut shot to the nuts and 1-overs. So he's gonna have some decent stuff. He can have also 6-7 suited, of course, which he should 3-bet sometimes pre-flop. But there are a bunch of open-enders, especially with the offsuit varieties. So whenever like he doesn't have the offsuit combos of, let's say, an open-ended straight draw, it makes a big difference, because it just if he only has the suited combos and he 3-bets some percent, let's say 9-10 suited, he's going to be 3-betting sometimes. That means he doesn't really have that many open-ended combos. So on Jack 8-5, I think it's not really a board where we can get rid of him easily. So I would use a mixed strategy. If the board is, for example, Jack 7-3, for example. Now, all he can have is gut shots. So he doesn't have any open-enders, or Jack 7-3 rainbow. All he has is gut shots. It really shouldn't have hands like 8-9 off. Maybe he does, maybe he don't, maybe he does, maybe he don't, I don't know. But again, like all he has is gut shots, and he doesn't really have like a flush draw because the board is rainbow. So then on the Jack 7-3, for example, I would be more inclined to just use an aggressive strategy and see bet my entire range for a small size. But on this particular board, I kind of like having a checking range here. As far as this specific hand, some of the lower pocket pairs with a club are mixed between a bet or a check. So usually how it approaches it is that the higher pocket pairs, so the middling pocket pairs, are the ones that are getting mostly checked. So hands like 9s, 10s, those are the type of hands that mostly get checked. And then you're going to be betting hands like kings, aces, so the top. And then you're also going to be betting the bottom one. So hands like deuces, 3s with a club are going to be definitely in there as a bet as well. So let's take a look into maybe his is timing, see that maybe sometimes does he bet or check. If he snap check, that means that he's probably going to be just always going to be checking, which I think is a mistake. We should definitely be starting to turn those low pocket pair with a club into a bluff sometimes. So let's see his timing. He didn't really think about betting. So yeah, I mean, I think betting here is definitely a good option. I mean, checking is a fine option as well, but at least his timing suggests me that he's mostly going to be checking that hand. We're going to be taking a look at this hand afterwards. So it takes a long time to think about his option. I mean, I don't think he should have a leading range there, even though it's a pretty good turn card for him. On the turn, I mean, like, this hand kind of benefits from fold equity, like clean up hands like King 6 or like King 4, Ace 3 type of stuff. You know, we can just bet and get them to fold. It's a spot where when he's betting as the big blind, he should be pretty polarized here. So it's not a spot where let's say we think about our checking range, right? We're going to be checking hands like Jack 7 suited. We're going to be checking hands like 9s. We're going to be checking hands like 10s, 8, 7 type of stuff, right? So we have a lot of medium strength hand in our range. So when that happens, big blind cannot bet with a small sizing with a high frequency, but because that's just not going to work, because most of our range actually, yes, we're going to have complete garbage, yes, of course, but we're also going to have a lot of medium strength hand that just have an easy call versus a small bet strategy. So basically what he needs to do is bet the really polarized range on the turn. It's not like he's going to be betting hands like 7s or 8-7 or even 9x. I mean, he could bet potentially a hand like Ace-9, but again, like, his strategy should be a bit more polarized. So over betting here, he's going to have plenty of really strong hands here that really wants to get value and put money into the pot, just because of the fact that now the flop checked through. If he had a hand like 5s, if he had a hand like 8s or Jack 8 suited, if he had a hand like Jack 9 suited, I mean, all those hands want to be putting in money into the pot now, because I mean, the pot is very small and you want to be building a pot. So just using a more polarized strategy with a big size, and I would probably use something like 1.5x overbet or even bigger than that. I think that's fine. And then we can comfortably bet something like Queen Jack, King Jack plus, as well as some bluffs, as well as, I mean, the value part of our range. So I think on the turn, I mean, the thing is that we could bet small. In general, once we check back the flop, most of our range is medium strength hand. So it doesn't really make sense to use a really big bet size on the turn, just because you're basically saying when you check back the flop, I have Jack 7, I have 10s, I have 8-7, I have maybe something like King 9 that I check back now that I can get value on. So I mean, the only hands that really wants to be, let's say, over betting is something like 8-9, 9s, maybe a hand like Jack 9 suited that you didn't bet the flop with. But most of your range wants to be betting a medium size. So I would delay c-bet here, something like 2/3 pot. I think that's fine. We could even use some blocks. I think that's also fine, but just keep in mind that, like, when we do check back, most of our range is medium strength hands, so we don't want to be delay c-betting big. When I see people do that, I mean, it just doesn't really make sense. And just be aware about what your range is, and also just thinking about that will also help you deciding what type of sizing you should be using. So for example, if I have a really strong hand on the turn, I would be using something like a 2/3 pot, and then on the river, that's where I would be using very big sizes and medium size as well. So let's say the river is like the 3 of club, I would be betting 9s there with 2/3 pot, for example. And then on the river, 3 of heart, for example, that's for sure going to be an overbet and go something like 2x spot on the river. So on the turn, I mostly use a medium size just because most of our range is medium strength hand. And then on the river, that's where we can split our range. So what I wanted to say as well is that since you're playing 10 NL, people will not, there's going to be a lot. You're going to be able to realize more equity than if you were playing higher and people were more aggressive. So I do expect like just checking down has some EV. Of course, we could do a mix of bet or check on the turn. Once we check back the flop, I think checking turn is fine, where we can check the river out and win against ace side or against other hand that he want to bet. So if he bets, I think it's a fold, and then if he checks, we're just gonna check down. We're winning like a small percent. We're winning like some percentage of the time, so that means we don't need to be turning our hand into a bluff. We have some EV in checking, so just checking it down, winning against ace-6 is totally fine. This is what I'm basically saying, right? Like, you can't have a worse hand than this except if you had a hand 4 deuce. So like he needs to be bluffing either the turn or the river. So that's why I'm saying like in these games, you're going to be able to realize more equity than you should just because of people like checking down hands like this. This is just like what else can you have that misses that board, you know? And you have 6 high, it's just a clear cut bet in his shoes. And here, let's go back and take a look at the king 6. So we open king 6 off. It's a bit on the loose side. I think standard would be something like king 8 off plus. It seems like it's a recreational in the big blind, given the fact that he's short stacked. So that may be why he's trying to attack, which I like. Of course, if there's a recreational in the big blind, we want to be opening more pots, playing more pots in position versus him. Now, with 5 deuce deuce, pretty good board for us. There's a flush draw, but it's very disconnected. He's going to have a bunch of stuff that just missed that board. Also, he's going to have to defend pretty wide. Sorry, I have the hiccup. I'm not sure why. But he's going to have to defend pretty wide against a small size c-bet. We're going to get a lot of folds. Also, this hand has, we can start bet checking worse, better king X that has a bit more showdown value. This one, we don't really have showdown value. We have great backdoors, not great backdoors in the sense that we only have 6 high backdoor flush draw, but we can pick up straight draws, plus we have a club, plus we have a spade, which makes this a pretty nice candidate to actually be betting flop, double barreling, and potentially triple barreling. This is a board where I would just be using a small bet, a high frequency strategy. And he bets 22%, which I think is, I would what I personally do is, let's on a board like this, I go 1/3 pot full range, and then the drier the board, the smaller I actually size down. So basically, if there's a flush draw, there's a big part of his range, not a big part, but there's a part of his range that has quite a bit of equity. So just betting really, really small, I don't think it's the right board for it. So basically how I approach it, it's really, really it's very small differences. I don't even think that it's going to make a huge difference in the sense that on, let's say, a flush draw board like this, I would just go 1/3 full range. If the board was 5 deuce deuce rainbow, I would just go 1/4 pot full range. And if the board is as dry as it gets, and it's ace 9 deuce rainbow with no straight draw, no nothing, or ace ace deuce rainbow, I can even min bet full range there. But again, I think all the strategies are fine. Just going 1/4 pot full range on the rainbow, and then when there's a flush draw going 1/3 is totally fine, but I don't think it makes a huge difference. Also, one thing is you're playing against a recreational and you're bluffing and you're using like a 22% size. Like, he's not gonna fold anything. Like just exploitatively against these guys, I play a bit more face up, where let's say I have a bluff, I'm gonna be using slightly larger sizing. It's not going crazy. And then if I have a very strong hand where I want to keep him in the pot, I just use a smaller sizing. So here, I think just using like a 1/3 full range is fine. Going 22, especially when you're bluffing with these type of hand, I think it's a bit too small. And then on this turn, I mean, like in theory, it's a pretty nice turn to be double barrel, and we have a club, we have a spade, but we're actually facing like a recreational here, most likely, given the fact that he has a broken stack. I think it's a turn where he's going to be calling like hands like king, queen, king 10, ace high, that we can just like bet the turn and get a ton of folds here. Also, the jack shouldn't really hit him that well. Plus, also, we have the ability to bluff clubs or spades. I mean, again, he's a recreational, so I mean, we're not going to go crazy, but we have the option to do so if we want to be bluffing. So I would like to see a bet here. And then as far as a bet, I mean, we can make fold like better hands for sure, like better king highs and also ace highs. And then as far as the sizing, I would pick, so in theory here, like we could probably just use like a medium size, like a 3/4 pot size, just because it's a board where, let's say you have a hand like ace 5. Let's say you have a hand like pocket 3s. Let's say you have a hand like 7s. Like, is your hand still good here? Like, is the jack really that good for him? Not really. Does 7s is most likely the winning hand? Yes. Do you want to deny equity? Yes. So you want to be betting. And you want to be betting here pretty wide, right? Like, you want to be like, even if you have a hand like 3s, I would still be betting. If I have a hand like 6s, 7s, ace 5, I would still be betting here. Just because our hands really needs protection, and it's most likely good as well. So I just want to be betting this turn aggressively. That means that since I'm going to be betting pretty wide, I'm going to be using like something like a 3/4 pot size. If the board is, for example, like 10 deuce deuce turn jack, now it's not the same thing, right? Because we're not going to be betting hands like 7s on the turn. We're not going to be betting hands like 10-7 on the turn. So what happens is that we're going to be using a more polarized strategy. So we're going to be betting a bit less often, and we're going to be really repping something like a strong top pair or better. That means that the sizing we're going to be using is something much bigger, and then we're going to be using an overbet. But when the board is, let's say, low, 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 and the turn is low, that means that, I mean, all of our pocket pairs basically wants to be betting on the turn. That means that most of our range wants to be betting like a medium size. Because I mean, like here, I still want to be betting 4s. I still want to be betting ace 5, 6s. What type of sizing that fits that range the best is something like a 3/4 pot, something in that area is totally fine. But if the board is 10 deuce deuce, right, and then the turn is a jack, then it's different because there's two high cards on the board already. We're not going to go that thin for value. So when we're going to be betting the turn, we're going to be saying, hey, I have a good top pair or better. That means that we're actually going to be over betting. So this is a spot where I wouldn't mind just going with the 3/4 pot bet. And this hand, I think it's a pretty nice candidate, just because we have the clubs, we have the spade, plus we can make him fold a better king high, and also can start making him fold ace high as well. Again, he's probably going to be calling some ace highs too, but we can still make him fold better hands. Plus, we have the ability to be bluffing rivers, which I think is totally fine. So I think he missed the bet here. Also, the fact that he bet really small on the flop, right? So he bet like 22%. That means that his range in the big blind will be a bit wider, or should be a bit wider. Is he really gonna pay attention to the sizing? I mean, probably not at 10 zoom, but like, again, like he sees like a 22% 50% pot size, he might say, oh, like, I'm just gonna call. I don't care about that, right? So he's gonna have like, he should have a wider range. That means that we can be a bit more aggressive also on the turn. If you, let's say, pot the flop, then his range gonna be much tighter. Then we have to be a bit more careful on the turn. So here on the river, I think we definitely need to be checking. We have like, I mean, we have king high. We can split sometimes. I mean, like we're gonna have like worse hands that have no equity. Let's say like 6-7 that have like 6-7 that have like 7 high that we cannot never win or split. So basically, yeah. I mean, it's pretty surprising that we see tens there. Of course, I mean, at lower stakes and micros, people are much tighter. But anyways, this is a spot where I would probably ended up betting the turn and then bluffing the river. But yeah, and I don't think it would have folded tens. But yeah, so let's continue. Jack 10 off, we're going to be opening if it gets folded to us. But we're not going to play now. King 7 off, it's a fold. Also, what I would suggest by him is that we see that he uses his mouse and clicks on the buttons. I would suggest that he uses hotkeys with raise and fold. That way it's much faster. He just needs to hover the mouse over the table to decide what action he wants to be playing. That means that he's going to be playing more hands per hour, and that will increase his hourly, of course. I mean, not by much, but it's still something. 6-5 off, we're going to be folding. So we see a limp here, green. I assume it's a recreational. I mean, he has a broken stack. So my standard sizing would be 3.5 x. Now, since he's a recreational, depending on the stats, I might adjust my sizing. So my standard is something like 3.5, and then if I see limp calls like king 6 off, then next time I see him, I'm going to be increasing my sizing. Like there's not like one perfect sizing. Like I see some guys like limping and then calling like 12x raise, you know, like, so just like see how bad is the player, how much does he want to be playing. If he's playing 75-22, for example, he's clearly there to play hands. So for him, it doesn't matter if you're going to be raising 3.5x or 9x, because he just wants to see a flop. This is super important because you can like gain massive EV by just raising really big against these players, because they're just not going to fold. And then you create a really big pot in position against a weak player, which is exactly what you want to be playing. Here with the 5-4 suited, it's going to be like a low frequency 3-bet. I would mostly try to 3-bet when I know the player is opening wide and also is potentially overfolding versus 3-bets. So let's take a look at the ace queen off hands, and then we'll talk about the 5-4 suited hand. I mean, it's pretty funny. I just look at the timestamp, and then we're about 25 minutes in, and we only looked at 1 minute 44 of the footage, which is, I mean, it's always what happens, but it's just because like there's so much stuff to talk about and pay attention that it's definitely worth it to spend a bit more time in those interesting situations. So when we go back to this hand, queen 7-5, very good board. He shouldn't have that many two pairs. He can definitely have some sets, but he can also have plenty of worse queen X. It's a spot where we could potentially use like a high frequency small bet strategy, but against a recreational here, I would start betting big, and then I would start to just build a pot. If the board was much drier, so let's say the board is queen 7 deuce rainbow, I would try to pick a sizing like half pot, where I don't want to be betting too big, but don't want to be betting too small, just because I want to keep him in the pot. Now, given the fact that, I mean, it's a bit connected, not much connected, but there's also a flush draw there. We have top pair, top kicker. I would just use something like a 3/4 pot here. So he goes for a 1/3 size, which I'm not a big fan of. Just because, I mean, you really have to adjust your sizings against recreational. I mean, of course, maybe like I don't really see the stats. Potentially he's not. But if I see somebody limping at 10 NL Zoom where the rake is really, really high, I would just assume he's a recreational. And on the flop, I would definitely be betting something like the 75%. And then here he snap check calls, which tells me that if he had like a really strong hand, like 7, 7-5, he would at least think about it. He can definitely have a hand like 5-4, even a hand like 6-7. He would need to be thinking about like, what do I check raise? Do I check call? So like his hand is like a clear medium strength hand where he just like snap check calls. It's really easy. I have a pair, but it's not that great that I can potentially check raise. And it's not that bad that I just think about check folding it as well. On the turn here, I would definitely be using a very big bet size. So I would be going something close to pot. One of the reason is the board is very draw heavy. So there's 2 flush draws out there. There's going to be many runouts that we cannot be value betting anymore with this particular hand, that I just want to get value now on the turn. So if the turn is like a deuce of club, then I would probably just size slightly down than I would on this particular turn when there's 2 flush draws and it's a bit more connected. So going like pot to like over bet here, like I would probably bet something like 135 or something like that. I think it's fine. Even 150 is fine. I don't think he's ever folding a hand like 5-6, 7-6, a flush draw, a pair plus flush draw and all that. Plus we are in position, so we don't mind building a bigger pot just because we have the luxury to check back the river if we don't like the river. So I like that. Yes, go. Okay, so 75, but he goes for pot, which I like. I really like that sizing. And he snap, let me see, snap check calls again. Like that's pretty nice. Like pay attention to those those timing tells, guys. So we snap bet, he snap check calls. I mean, the river is very bad. I mean, he can have plenty of hands like 5-6, 7-6. He can have flushes as well. 2 pairs on that river, I don't really expect, but I don't think we can go for value here. Once it doesn't lead, I do think that we're most likely good. I often see like on these type of runouts, just like recreationals being scared of actually us checking back, which we will hopefully. But yeah, by just donk betting here. So once he checks, I think it's an easy check back. But I'm really curious about to see what type of hands he's gonna show down with, just because of the fact that like he snap check calls the flop, snap check calls the turn, and I told you guys my assumptions about the type of holding he's gonna have. So let's see if I was right, and or maybe he ends up with a hand like ace deuce of club, but we never know with these type of players, of course. I would probably be betting like 2 pair plus. So he has jack 8. So yeah, I mean his hand is again like a pretty easy check call on the flop. Like it's a really like it's a very easy decision. He has a flush draw, right? You can potentially check raise, but yeah, even on the turn. So what happened here? I think we did 3-bet. Let me see. So 2.5x open. We did 3-bet to 10.4. Okay. Then we face a cold call, which is interesting. So yeah. So like facing a cold call here, it's quite tricky. Okay, because his range doesn't really contain aces, kings, or ace king, for example. Yes, sometimes people trap, of course. They're going to show up with these type of hands sometimes. But like even though he doesn't have all the really strong hands, like I just mentioned. His range is still quite strong. I mean, unless he's like a super maniac and just doesn't fold any two, you know. But like usually the cold calling ranges contains like hands like 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, ace queen suited, king queen suited, ace queen off, those type of hands, which are like, if you put it against like your 3-betting range, like if you 3-bet like 16%, from small blind versus button, I mean, that range has quite a bit of equity against your range. So it's by no means weak, in the sense that, yes, it doesn't contain the really strong hands, but his range still has quite a bit of equity against your range. So it's not like we can just be barreling like crazy here. So we're gonna have to be using a lot more polarized strategy, a lot more checking. On this board, I think we can still be c-betting range, since it's gonna have so many hands like 8, 7, 6s, maybe a hand like, I mean, ace jack is not gonna fold the flop, but maybe he has a hand like, yeah, 9. Those small pocket pairs, I think we can make them fold. It's rainbow. So yeah, I think we can either c-bet full range. Also, I do think we can have a checking range. And then with this specific hand, I don't mind just checking and turning my hand into a bluff on later streets once he checks. Like those like really like no equity hand, basically. I don't mind the check. But I would be looking to turn my hand into a bluff on future streets there. So once he bets, I mean, pretty easy fold. Again, like their range, like even though they don't contain like the really strong hands, I think they're still like, I mean, unless of course he's a really big recreational. Queen jack off, we're going to be folding against an open. I think that's a bit too loose. Especially with high rake, unless he has a read that this guy is opening like 55% buttons and then folds to 3-bet like 60% or something, we can start adding those like king 10 off type of hands. But even then, like queen jack off at 500 zoom rake is a really low frequency 3-bet. That means that if you're in like a high rake situation, like 10 NL Zoom, then you're definitely just don't want to be folding here. But it gets through, so good for him. Pocket fours, it's not gonna be a full frequency open. I would most like those deuces through 5s from early position and middle position. I would really open at some frequency. I would mostly open when the big blind is a recreational. Like even if this guy is a recreational, we open and then he cold calls, and then like we're in like a bad situation where like we're facing a cold caller and then we might get raised, or we get to the pot 4-way and then we flop a set and the board is deuce 7-6 for example, and then when all the money goes in, like even then you're not that thrilled about it, right? Because you're always gonna have bottom set basically. So yeah, I'm gonna press play so we can continue to watch. So yeah, so I would open like if there's a recursion in the big blind. Jack 3 suited, that's gonna be an open if it gets folded to us, but it's a snap fold. Okay. Jack 3 suited, I would be opening there. I would also try to be opening a bit wider, like at these stakes, especially on the button. 9-10 suited. It's gonna be a hand where we mix 3 bets and calls. So let's take a look at his timing again. I know I've been a bit annoying about that, but I mean, it's just to see if he actually thinks about 3-betting. And let's see his number if it's high. Okay, so maybe think about it, but it's a hand that we should definitely be mixing as calls and as 3 bets as well. Against a half pot here, we're never going to be calling. Even against a 1/3 pot, we're just going to be folding. Pocket jacks. Let me just try to take a look. All right, so we see a bit better. Sorry about that. So we open pocket jacks. So we're facing a cold call from the small blind who has 58 bigs. Again, this is the same thing as I mentioned. When we are facing cold callers, even though they don't have the really strong hands in their range, like their range still has quite a bit of equity against your opening range. So let's say you're opening like 18% under the gun and he's cold calling 6%. I mean, his range is quite tight. Your range is quite wide compared to his. So he has a bit of equity. The thing is, like, it really depends. Some people like cold calls here, like ace-5 off, that type of stuff. Of course, once you start like cold calling very wide, we can start attacking it a bit more. So basically how I would approach it is when facing a cold caller, I would still see bet the very good boards, high frequency, small bet size, like this one, but I would be a bit more cautious with more connected boards, for borderline boards, if you want to put it this way. So yes, I like the sizing, I like the bet. Once he calls, I mean, it's pretty, like those hands are all, like those middling hands are always getting checked. We're like, it's a turn where when we do bet here, like I see so many, like even at like higher stakes, like at 1K and stuff, like people here like would be betting something like 2/3 spot with ace-5, which doesn't like make any sense. Like it's a spot where you're gonna be really polarized and you want to be betting big, so you're gonna be repping like a strong ace-x, 2 pairs or better. That means that your range wants to be betting big. It's not like you want to be betting king X or even hands like ace-5. Just end up checking and then just bet like a very polarized range. So this hands will always gonna get checked. And then versus a bet, we're always gonna be, I mean, I don't like saying always, but I think that we should fold pretty much always. And then once he checks, I mean, we have quite a bit of showdown value, because once he check calls the flop, he's gonna have a ton of like 7x, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket 6s type of hand, and we beat all those, so we don't need to be turning our hand into a bluff. And we're gonna be taking a look here. He has king 5 off, amazing hand. So I mean, against this guy, we can definitely be attacking him. I would definitely label him. I would definitely, if he ever limps against me, or if I'm in the button, right, and he's in the big blind, I would probably open like 4x, 4.5x, 5x. Those are the type of adjustments that you need to be making, right? Like I would try to adjust, like if he limps, I would probably like ISO him like 5 or 6x or 8x if I have like a really strong hand, that type of stuff. I mean, he cold call like king 5 off, small blind under the gun for 2.5x. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I said ridiculous, but I mean, it's not the best approach there is if you want to be making money at poker. So let's continue. What happened here? Let me just go back 1 second.